Me and one army. My friend Ko has an army. Cohhilition, let's go. Hi, Zizaran here. And for a while now, Ko has been sort of like promoting and just giving a lot of love to our build guides. He asked me for a build that was like pretty simple to play, pretty easy and straightforward. And honestly, this looks like an amazing starter. So this is my gift to the Cohhilition and the Ko community. And thank you again for all the love you guys give on all the videos and everything. So this is a Spark Inquisitor. Should be very, very straightforward. You're basically dropping Orb of Storms on bosses and then standing inside it and using Spark. This was so nice that I was very close to League, starting it myself on Hardcore. The only downside is I'm going for the boss race, and on Hardcore, if you're standing still against bosses while doing damage, you do catch the occasional death. So it's a little bit scary to play this on Hardcore. I think it favors software a little bit more, but it very quickly got over 2 million DPS with even some medium tier gear, and it just looks really nice. So as per normal, I have done the step-by-step thing. Ascendancy points and everything is included as you level, so it's very easy to follow for new players. It holds your hand the entire way. Now in the skills, and something that's really nice for this is that you're leveling with the main skill. Like you're leveling with Spark from level 1, and honestly, until you get some projectile speed and duration, Spark isn't the most amazing thing. So if you don't like the way Spark feels early, you can obviously use Arc as well. You don't need Pierce or anything from that, so you sort of do get an extra skill gem. So feel free to use Arc for leveling early on, and you can switch later, maybe around when you swap to Crit. But especially once you get a little bit of projectile speed and a little bit of duration, Spark feels really nice. But we have all the leveling stuff here, and then we have a Crit swap. And then around Merc Lab, you're going to be switching to Crit. Early on Spark, Pierce, and Onslaught. And we have in the notes section loads of stuff, and also show where you can fix your Pierce if you want to get other sources of Pierce as well. Like there's quite a lot of Pierce sources, thankfully. Especially early, you might struggle with mana. So instead of using mana reservation nodes and using Determination and Wrath, which we ideally want to use late game, Determination is just so nice for tank and Wrath is really good for damage. You could also use Clarity early on. You probably won't be able to fit both Vitality and Clarity, and you can obviously play around with the level that you're leveling these two, because unlike the other auras, Vitality and Clarity reserve a flat amount, not a percentage amount. The build, I haven't even calculated the damage on Vaal Spark, so you do get to use Vaal Spark, which basically just has an explosion of sparks around you, and you do get to use that as well. So very, very good. Vaal skills use souls instead of mana. For extra min-maxing at the end game, for those that do want to pump a little bit more juice out of it, we have one skill called a Sigil of Power, which basically puts down a rune on the ground, and when you are attacking or casting inside it, it'll keep growing and giving you more lightning damage. We also have Frost Shield. This synergizes really well with Sigil of Power because it gives you crit when you're inside it. So you're putting down Sigil of Power, you're putting down Frost Shield, you're standing inside it, it'll make you tankier, it'll increase your damage, and we also have Orb of Storms for that. Now, these two, again, it's more for like endgame bossing and stuff. You're not going to need to put them randomly in maps. For the items, early on, it's just super, super basic gear. So one idea, there is a recipe, for example, for +1 lightning spell skill gems on a wand. And that is, you need to find gems that have quality on them. And they need to sell for a total of 40% quality. So let's say you found 4 arc gems with 11% or 10% quality each, and you sell that with a driftwood wand, they will then sell for a +1 lightning spell skill gems wand. Like, they just need to have the tag lightning in the gem, and it needs to total for 40 quality. So that's such a nice recipe. We can use that and we can regal it. You could aug it as well, but you know, just even with just 2 stats like this and crafted lightning, that's really nice. You can dual wield early and then switch to a shield around maps. But yeah, dual wielding early for loads of damage is fine. Other than that, it's just going to be life and resists. And I don't specifically put resists on certain pieces because you just need, this needs to be res capped. It doesn't really matter if you have a chest with a bunch of res or boots, like you just need to get res capped. And do remember that you lose res in Act 5 and Act 10 when killing Kitava. Now, in the mid-game gear, this is very realistic to get to, and you get quite a lot of damage here already. So gotta remember, we're getting a big buff in the new league. There's going to be way more cast speed tiers and just so much more cast speed in general. This is huge for this build because of the synergy with Orb of Storms and Spark once you have a lot of cast speed. Orb of Storms is getting nerfed in its natural, like the way it naturally pulses. But Orb of Storms pulses once each time we cast a lightning spell inside it. And because we're getting so much cast speed this league, that is really nice. We're getting a huge damage boost from Orb of Storms. So even though this looks really nice in the current patch, we can get, I think it's up to 30 or 35% cast speed on once now. Like cast speed across the board is getting buffed massively, and the highest lightning to spells tiers are getting buffed as well. So way easier than normal to get a really good weapon. For the shield and a lot of your gear, you just want to start getting spell suppression. At the end game, I would recommend more armor evasion gear, but that's going to take a little bit more work to color. You're probably going to need like the harvest one with like green, blue, and stuff like that. It might be easier for you to color the evasion energy shield. But the important thing is that you have evasion on the gear, because you really want spell suppression, and pure armor or pure ES gear can't roll spell suppression. We really do want to get to 100% spell suppression, and that should be pretty easy. In most of last league, I was able to do it without like one piece just completely missing spell suppression, and all of our pieces can have that. And we have things like Aziri Step that we can farm that give us a bunch, and yeah, we can have it on gloves, chest, helmet, and the shield. Now, if you're able to get it without the shield, you can get even better damage shields, like for example, plus lightning gems on a shield. But other than that, you can see even here at the mid game, the gear is fairly basic, just focusing on resists, life, and spell suppression. And with Orb of Storms being calculated perfectly, we should already with this set have over 3 million damage, and this is pretty easy to get to. So something that's really nice in the next patch is that cast speed is going up a lot, and this is going to make the catalyst caster for jewelry be even better. I think it's like 20% cast speed or something on the new jewelry. I can't exactly remember, but it's so much more than before. And obviously that also gets affected by the caster catalyst. So we can get a large amount of cast speed on our amulet and rings. Death Rush is another example of an item that's really nice early, fairly cheap as well usually, and it's just a good source of onslaught. You could also, if you get your crit up in other ways, you can drop your diamond flask if you're getting a lot of crit on gear and stuff. But dropping a flask for an onslaught is not the end of the world. Quartz flask, hard to drop in my opinion because you really want phasing, but you can drop this too. And late game, this is all really nice gear. Obviously things like Blizzard Crown is huge for this build because we're already ignoring resist, right? So this is just like loads of flat damage to spells, and we're getting damage effectiveness in the next patch. Obviously, the current PoB isn't accurate as well. We're currently using a level 26 Spark. The reason for that is the buffs aren't in yet, so we're just simulating how much of a buff we're getting. So it's not going to be entirely accurate. It's slightly lower than what it should be, and the damage effectiveness isn't calculated, but we are getting more damage and more damage effectiveness in the next patch. Now, once Path of Building updates, then you need to reduce this to a level 20 or 21 gem, because obviously then the buff will be hard-coded in Path of Building. But that's just a number thing. It's not going to affect anything in-game. And all the stuff in late game is generally pretty chase. It's just to give you an idea of what you can go for in the build. A lot of it as well is very tanky items, especially at the end game. This build gets incredibly tanky. It still should have over 3 million, maybe 4 million DPS with everything being like end game items. And you can get nearly 7,000 raw HP, and you can get energy shield on top of that. So we have nice things like, for example, in the chest where we have 10% of our life is extra energy shield. So this is a little easier for me just to explain than actually hard put in the build. But there's a Legion Jewel, Glorious Vanity of Doriani, and you can remove these life nodes here, which kind of sucks. They are good nodes, but it's the only place we can put it. And if you then put your Glorious Vanity here, it'll let you take Minor Matter, and Minor Matter will instead give you the same as the Replica Soul Tether. And Replica Soul Tether is another thing you can take if you don't have the jewel, and it gives you Corrupted Soul, which is 15% of your life as extra energy shield, and then your damage gets split between your life and energy shield. And this is insanely strong on Inquisitor, because one of our ascendancy nodes, what it does is it basically doubles your life regen. So even without vitality, we have 700 life regen, but we also get 700 energy shield regen. So it's so nice when the incoming damage gets split on our life and ES, because then we basically have double regen. And the build really benefits from as much regen as it can get. Sniper's Mark. You can see that at level 20, it requires 155 dex. We're very unlikely to get that. We're probably going to want to use Sorrow essences. Like Screaming and Shrieking Sorrow is just dex on stuff. They're really nice for crafting. But if I de-level my Sniper's Mark to level 10, you'll see that it has 113 dex. So it gets a lot more manageable then, and getting 110, 120 dex on this build shouldn't be a problem. Aziri Step as well have 120 dex requirement. So I don't think there's anything else in the build that will require more than that. Especially for hardcore, I'm a big fan of going over to the right here. That's because we get Melding and Written in Blood. Now, Doomcast isn't necessarily the best node, but it's pretty nice anyway, especially once you get the Glorious Vanity or the Replica Soul Tether. Getting that extra like energy shield is really, really nice and could get you up to like 3k ES. We have another tree with no clusters, and you can see that it replaces the cluster with lightning damage up here. I'm not a huge fan of these nodes, but it's good to have something to go for if you're not able to roll and get the clusters. The medium clusters in particular are very important because Spark feels really good once it gets projectile speed. And a lot of people like replacing Arc in builds like this until they can get enough projectile speed. Another really, really good thing like to help with this is anointing ballistics. Opalescent oil isn't the most easy to get early on if you're playing Soulfam, but as long as you're trade league, they're not too expensive. And obviously this is a really good node because it's damage, it's prod speed, and it's dexterity. And the bandit for this build, Alira is really, really nice. We are a crit build. The mana regen will help and everything. If you feel like it's getting a little bit too tight on points, you can go skill point. But yeah, generally I recommend helping Alira, especially good for league start for the resists. And Pantheon wise, Brine King and Relicash. Brine King, especially when leveled up, gives you freeze immunity, which is really nice. And another thing that's really nice with this build is that it's so close to other lightning builds like Arc or Bull Lightning. Even if you're feeling more adventurous, you know, Stormcall with the helmet enchant, like it's so easy to switch to other lightning builds if Spark isn't your favorite. So it's really good that way. Cracklands as well is maybe doable this patch and is getting a buff. Now, sadly, for like playing the build and stuff like that, I don't have a working Spark build right now. And obviously we're putting out a lot of league starters. So there's time constraints. But for playing the build, it is pretty straightforward. A lot of the time, it is just running around right-clicking. For whenever you meet a rare monster or anything like that, you can throw Orb of Storms down. And Orb of Storms is being changed this league. It is no longer a set duration. It has 29 at level 20 hits that it can do, and then it expires. We don't know, but we're guessing even if you go above level 20, it'll be higher than 29. And for most builds, this is just a buff. And it makes it that if you're doing a boss and not able to stand inside your Orb of Storms or not able to attack actively, it'll just last longer than before. It's only a nerf if you got over like 6 or 7 cast speed, which is really hard to get in the first place, especially because Spell Echo doesn't trigger the actual proc of Orb of Storms. So it should be really, really interesting. I'm very excited to see how this will play, and I'm hoping this might be my second build, and it looks very spicy. Now, some things are more up to yourself. For example, the Hazardous Research tool, it no longer adds projectiles, but it does make Spark like fire out around you in an AoE if you don't want to aim. Personally, I think I prefer Spark just going in a cone like it does at the start. But yeah, you can try out the Hazardous Research and see if you like it. Now, a thing that I want to experiment with, and this is definitely worth trying, is the Pinpoint support tool. Now, we haven't been self-casting for so long, I almost forgot that this exists. Pinpoint basically is for clearing. It'll make more projectiles and slightly less damage. But the more you're standing in the same spot casting, Pinpoint will gain Intensify charges and increase your single target by a lot. And this is actually kind of perfect for us because we're probably not going to need much damage clearing, but we might need more damage single target. And Pinpoint has basically a really, really nice caster mastery. So this mastery is on all of the cast speed nodes, so on either mental rapidity or nimbleness, and you can check for caster mastery. And the wording on that is spells which can gain intensity have +1 to maximum intensity. And that's another little like boost of damage and less projectiles. Now, losing projectiles on a boss isn't really a big deal for us. So definitely think I'm going to be experimenting with Pinpoint, especially for single target. And I'd probably be replacing faster casting with that. Spell Echo instead of faster casting isn't a terrible idea ever either. But the thing you have to remember is that Spell Echo does not trigger the Orb of Storm's extra damage. Let's talk about some questions at the end of the build that you might run into. What about socket pressure? How does the build deal with that? So I think we'll have quite a lot of open things on this build. Like there's not that much to really fit in. You should even be able to fit in like an additional like shield charge setup or just level additional gems if you want to just sell. Like especially early on, you want to level a bunch of spark gems, because once your gems hit level 20, you can Vaal them to try to get a level 21. What about mana issues? Can the player have those? Absolutely. They're mentioned in the notes, but there are quite a lot of ways to run into mana issues. And you can use an Enduring Mana Flask. Now, obviously, that doesn't work for bossing, but there we have, you can do Clarity instead of Vitality. You can get minus mana cost on Rings and Amulet because the mana cost is actually very low. And the Shaper Ring, for example, also has a stat that each time a spell hits something, you gain mana back. And the Dreamer node is just very, very nice for fixing any mana issues. What about quality of life and what kind of defense do we have in this build? So this build is surprisingly tanky. With a Granite Flask up, we're rocking around 15,000 armor, which is surprisingly solid. And Molten Shell with 15k armor will be like pretty decent mitigation there as well. And another thing, we have 100% spell suppression, which obviously tried and tested last league. Spell suppression is insane. You really do want to get 100%. If you are using the tree where you're over on the right and you're struggling on getting spell suppression on Gary, you can take Instinct. Maybe like drop some life nodes or something or some damage, and Instinct will give you even more spell suppression. And there's a mastery there that as long as your boots, helmet, and gloves have evasion, you get an additional 10%. So that's really good early. And even worst case scenario, you get annoying spell suppression as well. But especially if you're playing hardcore, I do recommend getting 100%. Other than that, I would say the main drawback of this build is Spark really feels better the more projectile speed and duration you get. The projectiles end up rearming after, I think it's every 0.66 second. A spark that has already hit something can, you know, ricochet off a wall and hit something again. So that means that bosses that are in an open area, like for example Awakener, etc., could feel pretty bad, especially until you get a really good amount of damage. But whenever something is like with walls or in like a smaller room, our projectiles are going to be hitting maybe as much as 5 or 6 times, and then we're going to have really good damage. So that's obviously a drawback to the build, but it's still incredibly strong. And another drawback is that we're self-casting. We're standing still while attacking. We don't have something like totems that we can just set on the ground and forget them. We actually have to be actively doing our damage. Now, this obviously feels very good, but that is also a drawback in different ways. So I want to make sure we're open and honest about everything there. There are some uniques you can get to help with that. For example, Karui Ward, Winds of Change. That will definitely make a big difference on the build. It's not something you'll be able to use super endgame because it's not like they have a lot of stuff on them. Winds of Change are okay, but like Karui Ward, it is a level 5 unique. I hope you have a great league start with this build. Thanks so much for watching, and a huge shout out to Ko and his community. You guys are amazing, and thank you for all the support. And I hope you all like the build. It should be very solid. I'm excited to hopefully do this as my second build. Inquisitor is just a really fun ascendancy, and Spark is a build that I've loved for a very long time. And this just has so many options to other things you can do. So as always, thanks for watching. Sub if you liked the video. More importantly, try to die less than I do.